The mansion surveillance cameras captured it at 3:47 a.m. A woman in her nightgown, barefoot, walking slowly toward the enclosure where two Bengal tigers paced restlessly in the darkness. The security guards watching the monitors froze. They had strict orders. No one approaches the tigers. Ever. These weren't ordinary animals. They were the late Richard Ashford's most prized possessions, raised from cubs in captivity, but never truly tamed. In the 6 months since the millionaire's death, 3 experienced handlers had quit. One left with 17 stitches. Another simply vanished in the middle of the night, refusing to explain why. But this woman, Emma Crane, the new nanny hired to care for Ashford's 7-year-old grandson, didn't run. She didn't scream. She stood at the fence line, one hand extended, and the massive male tiger named Khan stopped mid-stride. His amber eyes locked onto hers. Then, something happened that made the security chief reach for his phone, with trembling hands. Khan lowered his head, submitted. The female, Zara, approached slowly and pressed her enormous body against the fence where Emma's hand rested. The next morning, when confronted about the footage, Emma said only 5 words. They remember what happened. What did she mean? What could a nanny possibly know about 2 tigers that terrified everyone who came near them? The Ashford family had hired her based on impeccable references, a decade of experience with difficult children, psychological training, an almost supernatural calm under pressure. But there was something they didn't know. Something Emma had buried so deeply that not even the most thorough background check could uncover it. A connection that defied explanation. A past that intertwined with these tigers in ways that would unravel everything the Ashford family believed about Richard's death, about the animals he obsessed over, and about the secrets that luxury and power can hide behind golden gates. Because here's what no one understood. Emma Crane wasn't there for the child. She was there for the tigers. And what happened in that mansion over the next 42 days would reveal a truth so disturbing, so impossible to accept, that when it finally came to light, 3 people would be arrested, a fortune would be frozen, and the world would question everything they thought they knew about loyalty, memory, and the bonds that transcend species. You see, the human mind loves simple explanations. We want to believe that animals are predictable, that money can control everything, that the past stays buried. But some stories refuse to follow those rules. Some stories claw their way to the surface, leaving marks that never fade. Right now, you're standing at the threshold of such a story, and I need you to do something before we go further. Leave a like on this video, because what you're about to discover needs to reach others who seek the truth behind the impossible. And comment below. I'm ready to uncover the hidden truth. By doing this, you're not just watching. You're joining a community of people who refuse to accept the surface version of reality. People who understand that the most powerful stories are the ones that make us question everything. Congratulations. You're already part of this search. Now, get ready. What comes next contains a revelation that will forever change how you see the relationship between humans and wild animals, and the terrifying lengths some will go to protect their secrets. The advertisement appeared on a private placement agency's website at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was taken down exactly 47 minutes later, but Emma had already seen it. Urgent, live-in nanny needed for prestigious family estate. Must be comfortable with exotic animals. Discretion absolutely essential. Compensation, $15,000 per month. The salary alone was unusual, triple the standard rate. But it was the phrase, comfortable with exotic animals, that made Emma's hand tremble as she held her phone. She hadn't thought about tigers in 12 years. Hadn't allowed herself to. After what happened in Thailand, after the sanctuary, after the night that ended with her fleeing the country with nothing but a backpack and a burden of guilt so heavy it had reshaped her entire existence, she had built a new life, a quiet life. She worked with children because children were predictable. They tantrumed, they healed, they forgot. They were nothing like the animals she had once devoted her life to. Animals that remembered everything, that carried grudges and gratitude in equal measure, that looked at you with eyes that understood more than they should. But $15,000 a month. And exotic animals. Emma told herself it was probably parrots. Maybe a domesticated lynx. Wealthy people collected strange pets like trophies. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't possibly mean. The interview was conducted by Margaret Ashford, the deceased Richard Ashford's sister, a woman in her 60s, with the kind of severe elegance that comes from a lifetime of controlling everything around her. The meeting took place in a downtown office, not at the estate. Margaret explained that her nephew, Daniel, had been living with her since his father's death 6 months prior. The boy had become withdrawn, aggressive with other staff, refusing to eat. And the animals? Emma asked, try to sound casual. Margaret's expression tightened. My brother had exotic tastes. 2 Bengal tigers. They're in a secure enclosure on the property. You won't have any direct contact with them. We have handlers for that. A pause. Though we're currently between handlers at the moment. Emma's throat went dry. Between handlers? The animals have been difficult since Richard's death. Aggressive. Unpredictable. But they're contained, Ms. Crane. Your focus will be entirely on Daniel. The tigers are merely part of the landscape. That night, Emma sat in her small apartment, staring at the contract Margaret had sent. 2 Bengal tigers. The probability was astronomical. There were maybe 4,000 Bengal tigers left in the wild, a few thousand more in captivity worldwide. What were the chances? But even as she tried to rationalize, her hands were shaking because she knew, the way you know things in your bones, in the parts of yourself that exist beyond logic, that this was a coincidence. She opened her laptop and searched for Richard Ashford, real estate magnate, art collector, big game hunter turned conservationist, a redemption arc the media loved. Photos showed him at charity galas, shaking hands with wildlife organization directors. But then she found an older article, buried deep in the search results. American businessman funds Thai wildlife sanctuary, controversy over animal acquisition methods. The article was from 13 years ago. The sanctuary mentioned was Khao Pratap, the place where Emma had worked, the place where everything had gone wrong. Her breath caught. She clicked through more images, and there it was, a photograph from the sanctuary's opening. Richard Ashford, younger, tanned, standing beside the facility's director. And behind them, barely visible through the fence of an enclosure, 2 tiger cubs. Emma zoomed in until the image pixelated, but she didn't need clarity. She remembered those cubs. She had bottle-fed them. She had named them before the facility's director overruled her, insisting on Thai names that tourists would find exotic. Khan and Zara. They had been 4 months old when she left Thailand. When she fled, Emma closed her laptop and sat in the darkness of her apartment. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should decline the position, that revisiting this past would destroy the fragile peace she'd constructed. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent, the voice that had never forgiven herself for leaving, for not being there when the sanctuary was raided, for abandoning animals that had trusted her. If those cubs were now Richard Ashford's tigers, then they had been taken from Khao Pratap, probably illegally, definitely traumatically. And if they were aggressive and unpredictable now, it was because they remembered. Animals like that always remembered. She signed the contract at 2 a.m. and emailed it back. 3 days later, a black car arrived to take her to the Ashford estate, located in the hills 40 minutes outside the city. The driver didn't speak. The road wound through increasingly isolated terrain, past estates with gates that looked like fortress entrances, until they reached a property surrounded by 12-foot stone walls. The mansion was exactly what Emma expected, modern architecture trying desperately to look timeless. All glass and imported stone, the kind of wealth that announces itself through supposed understatement. Margaret Ashford met Emma at the entrance, her greeting perfunctory and cold. Daniel is in his room. He's been told you're here. Don't expect warmth. She led Emma through halls lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, past rooms Emma glimpsed but didn't enter, a library, a screening room, what appeared to be a private gallery. Daniel's room was on the second floor, decorated in a style that tried too hard to be age-appropriate. Superhero posters that looked store-bought rather than chosen, toys still in their packages on shelves, everything arranged by someone who understood children only theoretically. The boy himself sat at a window seat, his back to the door. He was small for 7, with dark hair like his father's in the photographs Emma had seen online. Daniel, Margaret said sharply. "This is Emma. She'll be taking care of you." The boy didn't turn around. After a moment of tense silence, Margaret left, her heels clicking away down the corridor. Emma stood in the doorway, not entering. She had learned long ago that trust couldn't be demanded. "You can see them from here," Daniel said suddenly, his voice soft. "The tigers." Emma moved slowly to the window. The enclosure was perhaps 200 yards from the house, visible across a manicured lawn that looked like it had never been played on. It was large, at least an acre, probably more, with artificial rocks, a water feature, areas of dense vegetation. And moving through it, massive and golden in the afternoon sun, were Khan and Zara. Even from this distance, Emma felt recognition hit her like a physical force. The male's gait, the way he held his head, the female's distinctive marking, an unusual pattern above her left eye, a broken stripe Emma had traced with her finger when Zara was small enough to hold. "Everyone's afraid of them," Daniel whispered. "The handlers quit. The security guards won't go near the fence. Margaret wants to send them away, but she can't. Dad's will says they have to stay here. He loved them more than anything." A pause, and when Daniel spoke again, his voice cracked. "More than me." Emma forced herself to breathe normally. "Your father loved you. You didn't know him." Now Daniel turned, and his eyes were red-rimmed, ancient with grief. Nobody knew him. He changed after he brought them here. He spent all his time with them. He had that enclosure built, and he'd go in there, and the boy's face crumpled. The night he died, he was with them. They found him in the morning, in the enclosure. Emma's blood went cold. "What happened?" "They say it was his heart, a heart attack. But I heard the security chief talking to Margaret. There were marks, scratches. They covered it up because if anyone knew the tigers hurt him, they'd be put down. Margaret paid people, made it disappear. She's good at that." Before Emma could respond, a sound cut through the air, a roar that vibrated through the glass, primal and commanding. Khan was standing at the fence line, staring directly at the mansion, at the window, at them. Daniel flinched backward, but Emma stepped closer to the glass, her heart pounding. And then she did something she'd done 12 years ago, something she taught herself to stop doing because it hurt too much to remember. She pressed her hand flat against the window and held Khan's gaze. The tigers had lowered, just slightly, a gesture of recognition so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. "They've never done that," Daniel breathed. "They've never looked at anyone like that. They just pace and roar and—" He stopped, staring at Emma with sudden intensity. "How did you do that?" Emma lowered her hand, her mind racing. "I didn't do anything." But she had, and Khan knew it. Zara had appeared beside him now, both tigers fixed on the window with an attention that transcended normal animal curiosity. They were waiting. After 12 years, after being stolen, shipped across the world, locked in a gilded cage by a man who collected them like art. They were waiting for Emma to come to them. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The guest suite they'd given her was luxurious to the point of sterility, all neutral colors and expensive fabrics that had never been truly lived in. At midnight, she gave up and dressed, moving quietly through the darkened mansion. The security system Margaret had explained earlier didn't cover the grounds extensively. Richard had valued his privacy, apparently. The grass was cold and wet with dew beneath Emma's bare feet as she crossed the lawn. Every step felt like walking backward through time, toward a version of herself she tried to erase, the version who believed she could save animals from the cruelty of human greed, the version who hadn't yet learned that some systems were too broken to fix, that some fights would cost you everything. The enclosure's fence was 15 feet high, reinforced steel with electric wire at the top, designed to keep 2 apex predators contained. Motion sensors tracked her approach, but Emma had watched the security patterns earlier. The cameras recorded, but no one monitored the feeds in real time. Budget cuts, the housekeeper had mentioned. The estate was expensive to maintain, and with Richard gone, Margaret was looking for places to economize. Khan and Zara were waiting. They had been pacing along the fence line for the past 30 minutes. Emma had watched from her window, timing their movements, seeing the agitation in their bodies. They knew she was in the house, Could probably smell her, even from this distance. Tigers had memories like elephants and noses that could detect scent from miles away. When Emma reached the fence, she stopped 10 feet back. Safe distance. Professional distance. The distance that said, "I'm not stupid enough to think you're pets." But Khan made a sound, not a roar, but something else. A chuff. The vocalization tigers use for friendly greeting, for recognition. The sound punched through Emma's carefully constructed defenses, and suddenly she was 24 years old again, waking at dawn at Cow Pratap to bottle feed 2 cubs who had been confiscated from poachers who'd killed their mother. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I'm so sorry I left you." Zara approached the fence, massive and graceful, her amber eyes catching the moonlight. The broken stripe above her eye was more pronounced now, a signature Emma would recognize anywhere. The tiger's posture was submissive, head lowered, ears forward, no aggression. Just recognition. Just, "I remember you. Where did you go?" Emma moved closer, her rational mind screaming at her to stop, her heart pulling her forward. She extended her hand toward the fence, not touching it, just offering. Zara pressed her enormous head as close to the barrier as possible, and the sound she made was almost a purr, that deep rumbling vibration that big cats produce when they're content. "What did he do to you?" Emma asked. "How did you end up here?" Behind Zara, Khan circled, restless. His behavior was different, more aggressive, more damaged. Whatever had happened in the years since Thailand had affected him differently. Or perhaps he blamed Emma more. She had been the one who fed them, handled them, spoke to them in soothing tones. And then she had vanished. Emma had learned the basics of what happened after she left through guilty late-night internet searches over the years. Cow Pratap had been raided 8 months after her departure. The sanctuary director was arrested for trafficking. Animals were seized, distributed to legitimate facilities. But 2 tiger cubs had disappeared during the chaos, officially listed as transferred to an undisclosed location for safety reasons. Now Emma understood. Richard Ashford had taken them, whether through legal channels obscured by paperwork and money, or through outright theft. He had acquired Khan and Zara and brought them to America, raised them here, in this enclosure, kept them as living trophies of his supposed redemption, from hunter to conservationist. "Did you kill him?" Emma asked softly. "Is that what happened?" Khan's ears flattened. Zara's body tensed. The question hung in the air, and Emma realized that she wasn't sure what answer she wanted to hear. If they had killed Richard Ashford, they'd be destroyed. Margaret was keeping them alive only because of the will's stipulations, but that protection was fragile. One wrong move, one incident that became public, and they'd be put down. But if they hadn't killed him, if his death really was natural causes despite Daniel's suspicions, then Emma was looking at 2 traumatized animals who'd lost another human they'd bonded with. More abandonment, more loss. A sound behind her made Emma spin around. Daniel stood 30 feet away, wearing pajamas and clutching a flashlight. His face was pale in the moonlight. "I followed you," he said, his voice small. "I wanted to see if you'd do it again. That thing with your hand." Emma's heart was pounding. "Daniel, go back inside. It's not safe. They're not going to hurt you." The boy moved closer, and Emma fought the urge to physically block him from the tigers. They've never acted like this with anyone. Even with Dad, they were different. Wilder. He had to use the tranquilizer system sometimes, when they got aggressive. But with you. Daniel was beside her now, staring at the tigers, with wonder rather than fear. "You knew them before, didn't you?" There was no point in lying. "Yes." "Where?" "Thailand. When they were cubs. I worked at a sanctuary." "And you left them?" The accusation in his voice was merciless. Emma nodded. "I did." "Why? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you left because you discovered the sanctuary you believed in was corrupt? That the animals you loved were being bought and sold behind the scenes? That you were threatened by people with enough money and power to make you disappear if you exposed them? That you chose your own survival over your principles and had hated yourself for it ever since?" "Because I was scared," Emma said finally, "and I thought they'd be better off without me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then, "That's what Dad said about me. After Mom left, He said I'd be better off here, with everything I needed. But what I needed was him, and he chose them instead. He gestured at the tigers. And now he's dead, and everyone wants to pretend it was normal, but it wasn't. Something happened that night. Something nobody's telling me. Over the next week, Emma established a routine with Daniel that looked normal on the surface. Breakfast at 8, lessons until noon, structured activities in the afternoon. But the real work was happening in the margins, in the questions Daniel asked, in the stories he told about his father, in the pieces of truth that emerged when the boy felt safe enough to share them. Richard Ashford had been obsessed with the tigers, not in the way a conservationist cares for animals, but in the way a man obsesses over something he believes he owns and controls. He'd spend hours in the enclosure, sometimes overnight, sleeping in a reinforced observation hut he had built inside. He documented everything: feeding times, behavioral patterns, vocalizations. His study was filled with notebooks, video footage, audio recordings. Margaret had locked the study after his death, but Daniel knew where she kept the keys. It took Emma 3 days to convince him to show her. They went at night, when Margaret was in the city for a charity function and the skeleton security staff was occupied elsewhere. The study was on the first floor, a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the enclosure. Emma understood immediately why Richard had positioned it this way. He could watch Khan and Zara constantly, even when he wasn't with them. The notebooks were organized by date, years of meticulous observation. Emma opened the most recent one, from the months before Richard's death. The handwriting started neat and degraded progressively into something frantic, barely legible. They remember. I thought time would erase it, but they remember. Khan especially. He watches me with accusation. He knows what I did. Emma's hands trembled. What did they remember? What had Richard done? Further entries grew more disturbed. Zara is more forgiving. She allows my presence. But Khan, there's murder in his eyes. He's waiting for the right moment. I've had to increase security measures. The enclosure isn't just to keep them contained. It's to keep me safe from what I created. Created? Emma flipped backward, searching for context. And then she found it. An entry from 8 years ago, shortly after Richard had brought the tigers to the estate. The transition was difficult. The sedation during transport was heavy. The males stopped eating for 2 weeks. I was certain I would lose them both. But they adapted. Animals always do. They have no choice. I own them completely now. They exist because I allow it. Just as they existed in Thailand, because I funded the sanctuary that supposedly saved them. The irony is delicious. People praised me for my generosity, never understanding that I was building my own private collection. Emma felt sick. Richard hadn't just acquired Khan and Zara after the sanctuary was raided. He'd been involved from the beginning. The American businessman who funded Cal Pratap had been Richard Ashford. He'd created the sanctuary as a front for exotic animal acquisition, which meant Emma had been working for him, unknowingly, 12 years ago. She'd been part of his operation. Daniel was reading over her shoulder. What does it mean? Before Emma could answer, lights flooded the room. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face rigid with fury. Get away from those notebooks. Emma closed the journal carefully, standing to face her. Richard didn't die of a heart attack, did he? That's none of your concern. You were hired to care for Daniel, not to investigate. The tigers killed him. Emma said it flatly, watching Margaret's reaction. The older woman's face confirmed it. And you covered it up because if the truth came out, they'd be destroyed, and you'd lose control of Richard's estate. The will stipulates they remain alive and on the property. They're your insurance policy. Margaret's composure cracked. You know nothing about what happened that night. Then tell me. A long silence. Then, Richard went into the enclosure as he always did. But that night, something was different. Khan was aggressive from the moment Richard entered. He attacked. Not playing, not warning, attacking to kill. Zara joined in. Security heard the screaming, but by the time they got the tranquilizer systems activated, it was too late. Richard was... She stopped, closing her eyes. The medical examiner was convinced to list cardiac arrest. There were scratch wounds, but they were classified as incidental. I paid very well for that conclusion. And you kept the tigers alive because Richards will split his estate between Daniel and a wildlife conservation trust. But only if the animals remain in my care until Daniel turns 18. If they're destroyed or removed, everything goes to the trust. I become Daniel's guardian with no financial support. This house, the property, the lifestyle, all of it depends on keeping those monsters alive. Daniel made a small sound, and both women turned to him. The boy's face was stricken. You're only taking care of me because you have to. Because of money. Margaret's expression softened, but it was too late. Daniel. The boy ran from the room. Emma moved to follow, but Margaret grabbed her arm. This is your fault. You've disrupted everything. The tigers were contained. Daniel was adjusting, and now he knows the truth. Emma pulled free, which he deserved to know months ago. She found Daniel in his room, not crying but staring out the window at the enclosure. The tigers were pacing, agitated. They could sense the emotional turmoil in the house. Emma sat beside him, not speaking, just present. Finally, Daniel said, "Do you think they meant to kill him? Or was it an accident?" "I don't know. I should hate them, but I don't. Is that wrong?" Emma looked at this small, grieving boy who'd lost his mother, then his father, and now discovered that the aunt caring for him was motivated by inheritance rather than love. "No," she said quietly. "It's not wrong. They're not monsters, Daniel. They're traumatized animals who've been used by humans their entire lives, including your father. Including you." The question was knife-sharp. "Yes, including me. I worked at the sanctuary your father funded, thinking I was helping rescue animals. I didn't know he was building a collection. When I found out the operation was corrupt, I ran instead of fighting. I abandoned Khan and Zara, and they ended up here in another cage, with another human who viewed them as possessions. But you came back." "I came back." Daniel stood up suddenly, moving to his closet. He pulled out a backpack and withdrew a small digital video camera. Dad recorded everything in the enclosure, hours and hours of footage. Margaret doesn't know I have this. I took it from his study the day after he died. Emma's pulse quickened. "Have you watched it?" "Some. Not all. I was afraid of what I'd see." He handed her the camera. "But you should watch it. You need to understand what happened." That night, after Daniel was asleep, Emma sat in her room with the camera and a pair of headphones. The footage was extensive, hundreds of hours, organized by date. She started with the most recent recordings, from the week before Richard's death. The first video showed Richard entering the enclosure at dusk. Khan and Zara were in the far section, near the water feature. Richard called to them, his voice carrying false warmth. "Khan, Zara, come here." Neither tiger moved. Richard's expression tightened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a remote control. He pressed a button, and both tigers flinched, vocalization that was clearly distress. Shock collars. Richard had put shock collars on them. Emma's stomach churned as she watched Richard use the device to force the tigers closer. His voice was gentle, almost loving, even as he hurt them. "That's right. Good. You see, I'm in control. I've always been in control." The next video was from 3 days before his death. Richard was inside the observation hut, drinking whiskey and speaking to the camera, a video diary of sorts. They're magnificent creatures, powerful, deadly, and completely mine. People don't understand true ownership. It's not about legal documents or cages. It's about breaking something wild until it has no choice but to submit. I've broken businesses. I've broken people. Breaking these tigers was just another challenge. His words were slurred, his eyes glassy. But Khan won't fully break. There's something in him that refuses. Zara learned her place, but Khan, he's waiting. I see it. Every time I enter the enclosure, he calculates. When will I be vulnerable? When will my back be turned? It's thrilling, really, knowing that he wants to kill me, knowing that I still have the power to prevent it. Richard laughed, the sound hollow and slightly manic. Emma would be disgusted if she could see this. Emma, with her soft heart and naive belief in animal rights. She was at Cow Pratap when these two were cubs. She probably still thinks she was helping them. She never knew the sanctuary was mine, that every animal there was potential inventory, including her precious Khan and Zara. Emma paused the video, her mind reeling. Richard had known who she was. Even 12 years ago, he'd noticed her. The video continued. I should have hired her then. Brought her here. She had something with them, a bond. They would have been easier to manage with her presence. But she ran. Disappeared after the director got arrested. Probably thought she was being noble, exposing corruption. She had no idea how deep it went, how many officials I'd paid off. The sanctuary raid was theater. I got exactly what I wanted, Khan and Zara, and everyone else went down thinking they'd accomplished something. The next recording was from the night Richard died. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m. Richard entered the enclosure, visibly intoxicated, stumbling slightly. Khan and Zara were in the shadows, watching. Come here, Richard commanded, holding up the shock collar remote. Now. Khan didn't move. Richard pressed the button, holding it down. Khan roared in pain, but he didn't submit. Instead, he charged. What happened next was brutal and fast. Khan hit Richard with enough force to knock him down. The remote flew from his hand, landing in the grass. Zara moved in, not attacking but blocking Richard's path to the gate. Khan stood over him, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then Richard made a mistake. He tried to reach for the remote. Khan's jaws closed on his arm. Not a killing bite, but a warning. Richard screamed, trying to pull away, and that's when his body seemed to seize. His free hand clutched at his chest, his face contorting. A heart attack, just as the official report stated. But it wasn't the tigers that killed him. It was his own panic, his own body failing under stress. Khan released him immediately, stepping back. Both tigers watched as Richard convulsed, gasped, and went still. The camera kept recording for another 17 minutes before security arrived, tranquilized both tigers, and removed Richard's body. Emma watched it all, tears streaming down her face. Not for Richard, but for Khan and Zara, who had defended themselves against their abuser and would forever be labeled as killers. Morning came too quickly. Emma had barely slept, her mind churning with what she'd witnessed in the recordings. Richard Ashford had been a monster disguised as a philanthropist, and Khan and Zara had been his prisoners, tortured into submission with shock collars and psychological manipulation. But the video evidence also proved they hadn't truly killed him. His death was cardiac arrest triggered by panic and alcohol. Yes, Khan had bitten him, but only after years of abuse, only when Richard had literally shocked him moments before. Any court would call it self-defense if the victims were human. But they weren't human. They were tigers, and the law didn't recognize self-defense for animals. Emma knew what would happen if she showed the footage to authorities. Best case scenario, it would support Margaret's cover story that Richard died of natural causes and nothing would change. Worst case, the shock collar evidence would prompt an investigation into animal cruelty. The tigers would be seized, and despite the circumstances, they'd likely be euthanized as dangerous animals. Unless Emma could find another way. She found Margaret in the conservatory, having her morning coffee amidst the orchids Richard had collected. Another hobby, another living thing he tried to control and possess. I watched Richard's recordings, Emma said without preamble. Margaret's cup froze halfway to her lips. Those were private. He tortured them. Shock collars. Psychological abuse. The cameras captured everything. A long silence. Margaret set down her cup with a delicate click. I assume you're going to tell me this changes things. It proves they didn't murder him. Khan bit him, yes, but only after being deliberately shocked. Richard's heart attack was his own fault. Alcohol, stress, physical exertion. The tigers were just defending themselves. And you think that matters? Margaret's voice was cold. You think animal control, or a judge, or anyone with authority is going to watch that footage and side with two tigers over a dead man. Richard's reputation may be tarnished, but he has friends. Powerful friends. People who've invested with him, socialized with him. The moment this becomes public, those people will ensure the tigers are destroyed. Not because they care about Richard, but because keeping dangerous wild animals in residential areas sets a bad precedent for their own exotic pet collections. Emma had already considered this. Margaret was right. The system was rigged in favor of humans, especially wealthy humans. But there was another option. A dangerous one. What if they disappeared? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Explain. The will says the tigers must remain alive and in your care until Daniel turns 18. It doesn't specify that they must remain on this property. If we move them to a legitimate sanctuary, somewhere with expertise in traumatized big cats, you maintain legal custody, but they get actual care. Rehabilitation. And how do you propose we do that without Margaret discovering? The estate is monitored. Those animals are probably tagged, registered, documented extensively. They're tagged, yes, but Richard falsified most of the documentation to obscure their origins. I found records in his study. They're listed as captive bred from a licensed facility that doesn't actually exist, which means moving them can be done quietly if we have the right contacts. Emma had spent 3 hours on encrypted calls that morning, reaching out to people from her past, colleagues from the Cow Pratap days who'd also gotten out, who now worked at real sanctuaries, who understood that sometimes saving animals meant operating in gray areas. One contact in particular, Marcus Reeves, now running a big cat rescue in Colorado, had been willing to help. His facility had space, expertise, and, importantly, a philosophy of asking few questions about where animals came from if bringing them in meant saving their lives. You're asking me to trust you, Margaret said slowly, to risk my claim to this estate on your word that this won't blow up in my face. I'm asking you to do one decent thing. You've spent 6 months keeping Khan and Zara alive for money. Keep them alive now because it's right. Margaret looked out at the enclosure, visible through the conservatory glass. And Daniel. Daniel comes with us. To see them settled. To say goodbye properly. He deserves closure. This is insane. Yes, but you're going to do it anyway. Margaret smiled thinly. How do you know? Because you're not as heartless as you pretend to be. You've kept those tigers alive against your own interests. You've maintained their care, their enclosure, even when it would have been easier to let them die of neglect and blame it on depression after Richard's death. You talk about money, but I've seen how you watch them. You're afraid of them, but you also feel guilty. For what Richard did. For being part of his world. A long, tense silence. Then when? 3 days. That's how long it'll take Marcus to arrange transport and prepare the facility. We tell the staff the tigers are being moved to a specialist facility for behavioral assessment. Only you, me, and Daniel know the truth. And if someone investigates, they won't. Richard's friends want this quiet as much as you do. As long as the tigers disappear without incident, everyone will be relieved. The next 72 hours were a blur of logistics and lies. Emma coordinated with Marcus while maintaining the facade of normal daily routines with Daniel. Margaret handled the staff, informing them of the upcoming transfer, in the clipped tone she used for decisions that were not up for debate. The hardest part was the tigers themselves. Emma visited them each night, slowly rebuilding trust that had been shattered by years of abuse. She couldn't enter the enclosure. The risk was too great. And besides, Khan's wariness of humans had calcified into something harder than mere fear. But she could sit at the fence line, speaking softly, letting them remember her scent, her voice, the person she'd been when they were cubs. Zara responded first, approaching the fence and making soft chuffing sounds. Her body language was submissive, eager, almost desperate for connection. Khan took longer. He would pace in the background, watching, calculating. But on the second night, he came closer, not to the fence, but close enough that Emma could see the scars around his neck where the shock collar had rubbed raw. I know, she whispered. I know what he did to you. And I'm going to fix it. I promise. Daniel joined her on the 3rd night, the eve of the transport. The boy had been quiet since learning about the move, processing emotions too complex for his age. Now he sat beside Emma, staring at the tigers with an expression that blended grief and relief. Will they be happy there? He asked. At the sanctuary? Happier than here. They'll have more space. People who understand trauma. Other big cats to socialize with, if they want to. It's not freedom. They can never truly be wild again. But it's better. Because of what Dad did to them. Yes. Daniel pulled something from his pocket, a photograph. Richard and Daniel, taken maybe 2 years ago, both smiling at the camera. A perfect lie of a happy father and son. I loved him, Daniel said quietly. But he wasn't a good person, was he? Emma chose her words carefully. People are complicated. Your father built businesses, created jobs, donated to charities. He also hurt animals and manipulated people. Both things are true. You get to decide which parts of him you keep and which parts you let go. I want to keep the good parts. The times he wasn't obsessed with them. Daniel gestured at Khan and Zara. The times he was just my dad. Then that's what you do. Daniel stood, moving closer to the fence. Khan's head turned, tracking his movement. For a moment, Emma tensed, ready to pull the boy back. But Khan didn't approach. He just watched. And in his amber eyes, Emma saw something that might have been understanding. I'm sorry he hurt you, Daniel said to the tigers. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him. His voice cracked. I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you'll be somewhere better. And I'm sorry that the only reason you're escaping is because he's dead. Khan lowered his head, just slightly. The same gesture of acknowledgement he'd made that first night when Emma arrived. Zara approached the fence, pressing close, and made a sound deep in her chest. Not a roar, not quite a purr, but something in between. A goodbye, perhaps. Or a thank you. Emma put her arm around Daniel, and they stood there together. Two people trying to make right the wrongs of someone they'd both loved and now had to reconcile with the monster he'd been. The transport team arrived at 2 a.m., Marcus and 2 colleagues, driving a specialized vehicle designed for moving large predators. They worked with quiet efficiency, speaking in low voices, moving like shadows across the estate grounds. Emma, Margaret, and Daniel watched from the terrace as the team prepared. Sedation would be necessary. There was no way to move tigers this size without it. Marcus had brought a veterinarian, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, who'd worked with big cats for 15 years. The dosage is calculated for their weight, Dr. Chun explained, showing Emma the loaded tranquilizer darts. They'll be unconscious for approximately 3 hours, long enough to get them loaded and on the road. Emma nodded, her throat tight. She'd watched animals be sedated hundreds of times at Khao Pratap, but this felt different, more final. Khan and Zara had suffered enough. What if something went wrong? What if their systems couldn't handle the drugs? What if this rescue attempt became another trauma? Marcus must have read her expression. We've done this 73 times, he said quietly. Lost one animal, a lion with undiagnosed liver disease. But these two are healthy. Physically, at least. They'll be fine. The sedation took 20 minutes. Dr. Chun was precise, patient, waiting for clear shots. Khan went down first, his massive body collapsing with a heavy thud that Emma felt in her bones. Zara fought the drugs longer, stumbling in circles, confused and frightened, before finally surrendering. Moving them into the transport crates was a team effort requiring winches and careful maneuvering. Emma insisted on being present, on checking their breathing, on whispering apologies neither tiger could hear. By 4 a.m., both crates were loaded. Marcus reviewed the route with his team, back roads, no stops except for fuel, straight through to Colorado. 20-hour drive, rotating drivers, constant monitoring. You're sure you want to come? Marcus asked Emma. You could fly out later, meet us there. I'm coming. Emma had already packed. So had Daniel. Margaret had agreed to let him witness the tiger's arrival at the sanctuary. 3 days away from the estate, from the memories, from the weight of his father's legacy. Margaret stood apart from the group, arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller than Emma had ever seen her. This is the right thing, she said, more to herself than anyone else. Richard would hate it, which means it's definitely right. The convoy pulled away as dawn began to break, the transport vehicle, followed by Emma's car with Daniel sleeping in the back seat. Margaret stayed behind, watching from the terrace until they disappeared down the long driveway. The drive was long and surreal. Emma and Marcus shared stories from the Khao Pratap days, filling in gaps, processing the betrayal they'd both experienced. They believed in the work, in the mission of rescue and rehabilitation. Learning it had been a front for Richard Ashford's exotic animal trafficking had devastated them both. How many others? Emma asked. How many animals did he take? Impossible to say. The sanctuary records were seized, but they were incomplete. Falsified. Best guess. 24 animals over 5 years. Big cats mostly, but also primates, birds. Some went to other private collectors. Some to roadside zoos. Khan and Zara were probably his favorites. That's why he kept them. Daniel woke up around noon, disoriented and quiet. Emma let him process in silence, occasionally offering water or snacks. The boy stared out the window at passing landscapes, and Emma wondered what he was thinking. What it meant to be 7 years old and learning that your father was a criminal, that your inheritance was blood money, that the animals you'd feared were actually victims. They stopped once, at a rest area in Kansas. While Marcus checked on the tigers, Emma and Daniel walked to a small playground. The boy sat on a swing, not swinging, just sitting. What happens to me now? He asked. What do you mean? After this. After the tigers are gone. Margaret doesn't want me. Not really. And Dad's gone. Mom's gone. Where do I go? Emma crouched in front of him. You're not alone, Daniel. Margaret might not have chosen this, but she's not abandoning you. And I'm not disappearing. Even after my job with you ends, I'll stay in touch. You'll visit the sanctuary, see Khan and Zara in their new home. You'll have people who care about you. Promise. Promise. It was a promise Emma intended to keep. This child had been damaged by his father's choices, but he didn't have to be destroyed by them. Unlike the tigers, Daniel still had time to heal, to become someone different, someone better. They reached the Colorado sanctuary at midnight the following day. The facility was larger than Emma expected. 200 acres of carefully managed habitat, divided into sections for different species. Big cats, bears, wolves, all rescues from private ownership, roadside zoos, or failed breeding programs. Marcus led them to the area prepared for Khan and Zara. 2 connected enclosures, each 3 acres, with natural vegetation, rock formations, and a shared pool. The fencing was high, but designed to look less like a prison. The goal was to give the impression of space, of freedom, even within confinement. The team worked carefully to move the still sedated tigers from transport crates into the enclosures. Dr. Chen monitored vitals throughout, adjusting dosages to ensure they'd wake naturally, without distress. Emma, Daniel, and Marcus waited in an observation building with one-way windows overlooking both enclosures. Daniel had been quiet the entire process, watching everything with intensity that seemed beyond his years. Khan woke first, around 2 a.m. His massive head lifted, eyes opening slowly, body taking several minutes to coordinate enough to stand. He looked around the enclosure, confused, possibly frightened. His first instinct was to search for the boundaries. He paced the fence line, testing it, understanding his new cage. But then something changed. He saw the space beyond the immediate enclosure, the hills, the other habitats in the distance, the sky unmarred by mansion walls. He stopped pacing. For several long minutes, he just stood there, breathing, processing. Zara woke 20 minutes later. Her reaction was different. She immediately sought Khan, moving to the connecting gate between their enclosures. Marcus pressed a button, and the gate lifted. Zara padded through, joining Khan, their bodies pressing together in a gesture of comfort and relief. They understand, Daniel whispered. They know they're safe now. Emma wasn't sure animals processed safety the same way humans did, but she understood what Daniel meant. Khan and Zara's body language had changed. The constant tension, the hypervigilance that had marked their behavior at the Ashford estate, it was already starting to ease. Over the next 3 days, Emma and Daniel visited the sanctuary daily, watching Khan and Zara explore their new environment. The tigers were cautious at first, expecting the space to contract, waiting for the shock of a collar or the appearance of a threat. But gradually, as day followed night followed day with consistent feeding, with space to roam, with the absence of human cruelty, they began to relax. On the final day, Marcus took them to a different observation point, closer to the enclosures. I want to try something, he said. Emma, stand at the fence. Don't enter, just stand where they can see you. Emma did as instructed. Within minutes, both tigers approached. Zara came first, pressing close to the barrier, making soft chuffing sounds. Khan followed, more cautious. But his posture was submissive, not aggressive. "They remember," Marcus said. "Even after everything, they remember you were safe. You were kind." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she pressed her hand to the fence. Zara pushed back, as close as the barrier would allow. Khan lowered his head in that gesture of acknowledgement that had become their private language. "I won't leave you again," Emma whispered. "Not this time." Daniel joined her, and both tigers allowed his presence. The boy reached out tentatively, not touching the fence, just offering his hand in the same gesture Emma had. And Khan, who had suffered more than any creature should, who had every reason to hate humans, took one step closer. It wasn't forgiveness. Animals don't forgive because they don't judge the way humans do. But it was acceptance. It was moving forward. That night, Emma and Daniel sat in the sanctuary's visitor cabin, playing cards and not talking about tomorrow, when they'd have to return to reality. Margaret had called twice, terse updates on estate business and arrangements for Daniel's schooling. "Are you glad we did this?" Emma asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally, "Dad hurt them. He hurt me too, in different ways. But you fixed part of it. Not all of it. Some things can't be fixed. But part of it." He looked at her with those ancient eyes. "That's what matters, right? Fixing what you can, even when it's hard." "Yes," Emma said softly. "That's exactly what matters." 6 months after that midnight move, Emma Crane stood at the observation point overlooking Khan and Zara's enclosures, watching 2 Bengal tigers move through their territory with a grace and confidence that would have been impossible at the Ashford estate. The late afternoon sun turned their coats to liquid gold, and for a moment, Emma allowed herself to imagine they were wild, that they'd never been touched by human greed, that their story had been different from the start. But it hadn't been, and pretending otherwise would dishonor everything they'd survived. Marcus joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Zara caught a rabbit yesterday," he said. "First successful hunt since they arrived. We stocked the enclosures with prey occasionally. Let them practice instincts. She was so proud. Carried it around for an hour before eating." Emma smiled. Small victories. That's what rehabilitation was built on. Not grand transformations, but tiny moments when traumatized animals remembered how to be themselves. "Khan's still having nightmares," Marcus continued. "Wakes up pacing, hypervigilant. Dr. Chin thinks it might always be part of him now. What Richard did. You can't erase that kind of damage. But it's getting better." Slowly, Khan emerged from the vegetation now, as if summoned by hearing his name. He moved to the observation building, staring directly at the one-way glass. He couldn't see Emma, but he knew she was there. After 6 months of weekly visits, he'd learned the patterns. Emma pressed her hand to the glass, a private ritual they developed. Khan's head lowered, just slightly. "Hello. I see you. I remember. Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Coming back? Reopening all those old wounds?" Emma considered the question. The trauma of Kal Pratap, the years she'd spent trying to forget, the guilt that had eaten at her for abandoning animals she'd promised to protect. Yes, coming back had been agonizing, but staying away would have been worse. "I regret that it took me 12 years, she said finally. "I regret that Khan and Zara suffered because I was too afraid to fight Richard Ashford when I had the chance. But coming back? No, that's the one thing I don't regret." Daniel visited once a month, accompanied by Margaret. The relationship between aunt and nephew had evolved into something more genuine, not warm, exactly, but honest. Margaret had sold the Ashford estate, moved into a smaller home in the city, and established a trust fund for Daniel that was separate from Richard's tainted fortune. She'd also made an anonymous donation to the Colorado Sanctuary, enough to expand the big cat facilities and hire 2 additional staff members. Guilt money, probably, but money that would save lives nonetheless. Daniel had changed too. The withdrawn, grieving boy had begun opening up in therapy, processing his father's legacy in age-appropriate ways. He talked about becoming a veterinarian, or maybe a wildlife biologist. Careers built on healing rather than possessing. Emma had taken a position at the sanctuary, working as an enrichment coordinator and public educator. Her job was to help visitors understand that the animals they saw weren't entertainment or curiosities, but survivors of human cruelty. That every tiger, bear, and wolf at the facility had a story of trauma. That rescue and rehabilitation were ongoing processes, not fairy tale transformations. She told Khan and Zara's story carefully, omitting details that would identify the Ashford family, but preserving the essential truth. These tigers had been stolen from a sanctuary, trafficked internationally, abused by a wealthy collector, and finally liberated. They were symbols of everything wrong with exotic animal ownership, and everything right about giving damaged creatures a second chance. Some visitors cried. Some got angry. Some left donations. All of them left understanding that wild animals weren't meant to be owned, and that the consequences of trying were measured in broken bodies and broken spirits. Emma thought about Richard Ashford sometimes, about the night Khan bit him and triggered the heart attack that ended his life. She didn't mourn him, but she did wonder what might have driven him to such cruelty. What emptiness inside him needed to be filled by dominating creatures that should never have been dominated. Maybe it was the same emptiness that drove so many humans to destroy beautiful things. The need to prove they had power over nature, over life itself. The inability to appreciate something without controlling it. Whatever it was, Richard had paid for it with his life. And Khan and Zara were paying for it still, would pay for it for the rest of their lives, condemned to captivity even in rescue, because they could never be truly wild again. But they were alive. They were safe. And they were healing, in whatever way traumatized animals could heal. That had to be enough. You made it to the end. You stayed for the full story, through the darkness and the difficult truths, through revelations about human cruelty and animal resilience. That makes you part of a rare community. People who don't look away from uncomfortable realities. People who understand that the most important stories are often the ones that disturb us, challenge us, force us to reconsider what we thought we knew. Khan and Zara's story is finished, but thousands of other animals remain in situations like theirs, trapped in private collections, suffering in roadside zoos, traded like commodities by people who see them as possessions rather than living beings. Every time you watch content like this, every time you engage and share, you're helping expose those situations. You're part of the solution. So here's what I need you to do. In the comments below, write, "This story changed the way I see the human need for control." When you do that, you're not just engaging with a video. You're declaring yourself part of a community that refuses to accept cruelty as normal. You're standing with people who believe animals deserve better than being owned, displayed, and broken for human entertainment. I'll be reading every comment. I'll recognize you as one of the committed ones, the people who don't just watch and forget, but actually care about making a difference. Next, share this video. Send it to someone who owns exotic pets, who thinks wild animals can be domesticated, who needs to understand the hidden cost of their choices. Share it with someone who loves animals and wants to understand the complex reality of rescue and rehabilitation. Make sure this story reaches people who need to hear it. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this isn't just about one story of two tigers. This is about pulling back the curtain on the exotic animal trade, on the secret suffering behind closed gates and private estates, on the uncomfortable truth that some of the most respected people in society are committing atrocities no one talks about. You're not just a viewer. You're an investigator of truth. You're someone brave enough to look at what most people turn away from. And there are more stories waiting. Stories of animals rescued from laboratories, from circuses, from breeding mills. Stories of the people who risk everything to save them. Stories that will make you angry, that will break your heart, and that will ultimately remind you why this fight matters. So stay curious, stay committed, and keep watching, because the next story is already waiting, and it's even more shocking than this one. Maybe it was the same emptiness that drove so many humans to destroy beautiful things. The need to prove they had power over nature, over life itself. The inability to appreciate something without controlling it. Whatever it was, Richard had paid for it with his life. And Khan and Zara were paying for it still, would pay for it for the rest of their lives, condemned to captivity even in rescue, because they could never be truly wild again. But they were alive. They were safe. And they were healing, in whatever way traumatized animals could heal. That had to be enough. You made it to the end. You stayed for the full story, through the darkness and the difficult truths, through revelations about human cruelty and animal resilience. That makes you part of a rare community. People who don't look away from uncomfortable realities. People who understand that the most important stories are often the ones that disturb us, challenge us, force us to reconsider what we thought we knew. Khan and Zara's story is finished, but thousands of other animals remain in situations like theirs, trapped in private collections, suffering in roadside zoos, traded like commodities by people who see them as possessions rather than living beings. Every time you watch content like this, every time you engage and share, you're helping expose those situations. You're part of the solution. So here's what I need you to do. In the comments below, write, "This story changed the way I see the human need for control." When you do that, you're not just engaging with a video. You're declaring yourself part of a community that refuses to accept cruelty as normal. You're standing with people who believe animals deserve better than being owned, displayed, and broken for human entertainment. I'll be reading every comment. I'll recognize you as one of the committed ones, the people who don't just watch and forget, but actually care about making a difference. Next, share this video. Send it to someone who owns exotic pets, who thinks wild animals can be domesticated, who needs to understand the hidden cost of their choices. Share it with someone who loves animals and wants to understand the complex reality of rescue and rehabilitation. Make sure this story reaches people who need to hear it. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this isn't just about one story of two tigers. This is about pulling back the curtain on the exotic animal trade, on the secret suffering behind closed gates and private estates, on the uncomfortable truth that some of the most respected people in society are committing atrocities no one talks about. You're not just a viewer. You're an investigator of truth. You're someone brave enough to look at what most people turn away from. And there are more stories waiting. Stories of animals rescued from laboratories, from circuses, from breeding mills. Stories of the people who risk everything to save them. Stories that will make you angry, that will break your heart, and that will ultimately remind you why this fight matters. So stay curious, stay committed, and keep watching, because the next story is already waiting, and it's even more shocking than this one.